I'm going to pray us in and turn it over to you, Ross. And thank you again
Yeah.
for doing this. This, for those of you who've hopped on, this ends our program year. I know there will be another offering on a Sunday related to the social justice program Build in the city of Baltimore that comes toward the end of May. But in terms of our formal offerings for this program year, this is it. If you have ideas of other things you'd like to see, please email me. I'd love to hear from you. So with that, let us pray. Almighty God, whom truly to know is everlasting life, we give you thanks for Ross, for his gifts and talents, for his opening our eyes, our ears, our hearts to how it is you are worshiped in the art of other traditions. Be with us now, guide Ross in his conversation, and bring us to know you through the love you have for us all. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
So I'm going to welcome you, everybody, and then I'm going to hop off and let you all enjoy Ross, since I have to go to a rehearsal for the 11 o'clock service. So thank you all for being here again.
Hi.
Okay, so let's start. So I'm going to read straight from the dictionary to begin, to give a kind of overview definition of Buddhism. So, quote, Buddhism has no God and gives a central role to the doctrine of karma, which I'm sure everyone's familiar with in some way. The Four Noble Truths of Buddhism state that all existence is suffering, that the cause of suffering is desire, that freedom from suffering is nirvana, and that this is attained through the eightfold path of ethical conduct, wisdom, and mental discipline, which includes meditation. So first I'm going to show, there we go. So this is a statue of the Buddha Sakyamuni, otherwise known as Siddhartha Gautama. He was the figure who began Buddhism in northeastern India in the 5th century BCE. While the religion had a period of popularity in India, it was largely supplanted in its native country by the Vedic tradition, later Hinduism. It survived in other parts of Asia, though, such as Tibet, Sri Lanka, Burma, and the countries of East Asia. And it was often syncretized with native faiths and traditions. For example, Taoism in China or Shintoism in Japan. Shinto is actually one of the other possible religions I was thinking about doing for this presentation. There are two major traditions within Buddhism, the Theravada and the Mahayana. The Mahayana, also translated as the Great Path, is the much more popular form. It's the more almost messianic form. And its path of commitment is to the goal of salvation from suffering for all beings. And this developed later and was widely accepted throughout Northern and Eastern Asia, the Mahayana. In Tibet, specifically, esoteric Buddhism found acceptance due to the similarities Buddhism had with the native Bon, that's B-O-N religion. And I'll show you a picture of a Bon deity, Walsa Nagampa. This is from the early 15th century. The esoteric texts and rituals were gathered into what became known as the Vajrayana, or the diamond or thunderbolt path, or apocalyptic Buddhism. Vajrayana Buddhism is a richly and visually complex form that builds on Mahayana philosophies and their accompanying belief that ultimate Buddha nature, or truth nature, resides awaiting discovery within all beings. So again, like I said, it's a bit more messianic, and Vajrayana specifically appeals to the idea that everybody can achieve nirvana within their lifetime. Vajrayana believes in swift progress towards enlightenment rather than endless reincarnation, as in most Mahayana schools. Again, like I said, allowing achievement in a single lifetime, achievement of nirvana in a single lifetime. Let's see. So we have the authority of Llamas. We have a picture of a llama on the left there, from the 11th century. Although I don't know if that particular llama that's depicted was from, I'm sure that llama was depicted from earlier. That person who's depicted was from an earlier time. So these were originally religious masters, the Llamas, but now it's an honorific for any Tibetan monk that practices, as well as gurus from outside monasteries. And Llamas were more significant in Tibet and led to an emphasis on individual authority throughout the culture. And on the right is a portrait of the great teacher Marpa, and he was a monk who I believe went to India to collect texts and teachings and returned with them to Tibet. Besides the deification of Sakyamuni, the founder, what we consider when someone says the Buddha, typically that's who they're referring to. But there exists roughly two groups of a great number of deities in Tibetan Buddhism. First are those within the 5 Tathagatas, an epithet for Buddha. So we have the 5 Tathagatas of up top, we have the 4 celestial Tathagata Buddhas marking the directional Pure Lands, essentially like a kind of heaven. That's what the Pure Lands are. And they flank Vairocana in the center. In the top image, we have Vairocana symbolized by the double-pronged Vajra or thunderbolt. That's where the name Vajra, again, Vajrayana, the thunderbolt path comes from. That symbol in the blue, it looks kind of like 2 tridents formed together. Well, it's supposed to be a thunderbolt. And the large diamond in the center refers to Vajrayana, the path, being the diamond vehicle of Buddhism. And then we have below, so the ornament on top would be used, like put on a statue or a sculpture of some kind. And then on the bottom, we have a manuscript cover. And again, we have the 5 Tathagatas. In this case, Vairocana is shown in a personal human form, or personified form in the middle. And the manuscript cover is about 2.5 feet wide. And then second, besides the Tathagatas, are all those gods appropriated from both Hinduism and as well as other Asian religions. So, who in Tibetan Buddhism especially, one deity that is particularly important is Avalokitesavara. I hope I'm getting these names right. I did not have a pronunciation guide that I could find anywhere. But Avalokitesavara is one of the greatest Buddhas, and today is considered incarnated in the Dalai Lama. A Tulku, Tulku, is an enlightened teacher or religious personage who is reborn in another body. A lot of you might have heard that the Dalai Lama is a reincarnation. He's considered a reincarnation of Avalokitesavara. This belief in Tulku became a major subject in Tibetan art, as paintings displaying the spiritual lineage of a particular order or a monastic order provided visual authority for legitimacy of that order, and which was especially critical during times when the orders competed for power. In Tibet, again, like I said, eminent lamas are apotheosized, seen not only as reincarnations of previous revered lamas, but as emanations of divinities. Again, in this case, the Dalai Lama being a reincarnation of, didn't mean to do that, being a reincarnation of a Buddha. However, we think of reincarnation in terms of the soul, Buddhism doesn't really recognize the existence of a soul in the same way that we do. The term emanation may be more appropriate than rebirth or reincarnation in the relation to the concept of a Tulku. And so, again, like I said, the Dalai Lama is the most well-known example of this, but there are others in art in the history of Tibet. So that was, I tried to give a kind of general overview of some of the religious tenets. Next, we're going to move on to the history of Tibet as it relates to Buddhism. Here's a map of Tibet. And this includes both modern Tibet, the province in China, as well as other portions of the geography which have considered historically been part of the people have identified as Tibetan. So you have the three major areas of Tibet: Utsang, Kham, and Amdo. Those are the three major regions. So Tibet is surrounded by a ring of natural boundaries. You see the Kunlun Mountains in the north, and the Himalaya, of course, in the south. And then you have mountains and rivers in the east, in the northeast. These natural boundaries have strongly influenced the people, and to some extent led to the shamanistic flavor of their culture. The Tibetan Plateau is very, very big, as you can see here. And so most of it's very desolate and inhospitable. Most of the population gathered in the relatively hospitable southern valleys. You can see where it says Central Tibet and West Tibet. That's where most of the people have gravitated to over the course of history. Buddhism arrived mainly from the Pala kingdom of northern and northeastern India, which was the homeland of the historical Buddha Sakyamuni. The first to adopt the religion in Tibet were the central Tibetan kingdoms around the mid 7th century. And there was already an idea of divine kingship that was already in place beforehand. And this was reflected in those claims of royal and divine reincarnation. Western Tibetan Buddhism developed along a parallel, though distinct path from the center, dominated as it was by the religion and art of Kashmir. Western Tibet was also home to the pre-Buddhist, nature-based, and shamanistic Bon religion that I mentioned earlier. It and Buddhism developed in parallel, each contributing different aspects to the other. Again, like in China, you have Buddhism and Taoism, and in Japan you have Shintoism and Buddhism, both continuing syncretically but also divergently in some ways at the same time. In the east and northeast, there's known to have been a Chinese influence, although these regions' earlier development is not well known. The first golden age of Tibetan Buddhism ended by the end of the 9th century, followed by persecution, and then by what's called the second diffusion, lasting from the end of the 10th through the 11th centuries. And then from after that, Buddhism was firmly established in the area. By the mid 11th century, most of the major religious orders had been created. Following the Nyingma order came the Sakya, Kagyu, and Gelug orders. The Dalai Lama is the head of the Gelug order, and numerous suborders, each with features so distinctive that many have retained their identity and particular beliefs into the present time. Later on, from the early 15th century, during the Ming Dynasty in China, the art of Tibet can be more properly considered as Sino-Tibetan, considering the artistic and political influence of the Chinese in the region. And I forgot to put this in my notes, but of course, you should all, I presume, know of the invasion of Tibet by the communist Chinese in the 1950s. Thousands of pieces of art, I'm sure hundreds of pieces of architecture were destroyed in the Cultural Revolution. And so much of the art that we still have was art that was ferried out from Tibet, by largely Westerners, Russians, and other Europeans, and art that had already been exported to places like India and Nepal. That survives. Much of the art that was in Tibet during the Cultural Revolution was destroyed. So that's kind of an overview of the history of Tibet as it relates to Buddhism. So let's go see. So first we're going to cover different deities and other venerated figures within the religion. So first we're going to look at Buddhas. If we look at the Buddha, or Buddha, again, the pronunciation, in the top image, I believe this is another manuscript cover, but this is on the inside rather than the outside. The outside is carved wood. This is painted. In the center, you have Sakyamuni, and you can see he's differentiated by not having a princely crown. But on either side of him are 5 past Buddhas. So again, this idea of reincarnation, the Buddha himself lived past lives. And then within Mahayana, I believe, specifically, there's the idea of Maitreya. He's the Buddha on the far right. And this is the Messianic Buddha, the future Buddha that will come later, essentially during the apocalypse. And the eschatology is very complicated and not worth going into at this point. But just again to know that this is a common theme of the different Buddhas and the reincarnations. And then you have the primordial Buddha, Vajrayana. He is considered a divine manifestation of the totality of Buddhist teachings and is credited with being the source of the Buddhist tantric texts. Here in this picture in the bottom here, he holds a Vajra, again, a lightning bolt, in his left hand on our right, that it symbolizes the male aspect or energy. And in his right hand on our left, he's holding a bell, symbolizing emptiness or the female the female aspect. One of the most amazing, in my opinion, manifestations of Buddhist art is the wrathful protector deities. We see these often and we think they're demons, and in a way they are, but they're really more gods that are protecting. On the reverse of this particular painting, the inscription reads in part, "The great protector Mahakala, the fierce god who is inseparable from my Llama, to whom I present this tanka of the great protector, whose true spirit is ever present in the precious painting. May you, the great protector, always be near us and help us to follow the path to righteousness." So despite the fact that these are very fierce, sometimes grotesque images, they're considered positive by Buddhists. And I want to focus in on one detail from this painting, or tanka as it's called. If you look, this is a detail of this painting. I want you to look at the heads. It's a necklace of heads below the god's belly. You can see the heads, and they're in different states of decomposition or mutilation. Again, this is showing the god's power, and it's kind of a token or emblem of resisting evil. You can see he's trampling below him an elephant-headed demon or entity. Again, the terms are not quite, don't quite correlate with what we have in the West. So that's the ferocious deities. I hope I've explained the concept adequately. Again, it's one of the more impenetrable or hard to penetrate concepts of Buddhism from the Western perspective. But I hope now that you see, when you see these images, you know that they're looked upon in a positive light. Next, we're going to look at what are called the Yab Yum, or male-female. These are deities shown with their consorts in sexual union. And again, from the West, this is very disconcerting in a lot of ways. But again, they're actually they're seen very positively. The male figure typically embodies compassion, and the female transcendent wisdom. And we can view these as a visual metaphor, a metaphor of the combination of compassion and wisdom that is essentially, and this metaphor, this visual metaphor, actually embodied in sculpture and painting, is essentially unique to Tibet, even though the concept behind it has been found in Indian texts. This Yab Yum, or in some cases Yum Yab, where the male is sitting on the female, is essentially unique to Tibet. Next, oh, and I also wanted to point out, there will be a video of this posted later in the week. And I encourage you, well, first of all, I encourage you to go to the Metropolitan. You may have noticed that most of the artworks that I've put up are from the Met. I encourage you to go to the Met and just search Tibet or Buddhism in their search bar there, and it'll come with all of these images that I've been showing you, and you can see them in greater detail. And you can see I've drawn some of the text from that website as well. And you can read more about them. The Met is just, as most of you should know, a fantastic resource, and they've done a very good job of digitizing their collection for the most part. Next, we have an Arhat, A-R-H-A-T, also translated as a venerable. An Arhat holds the highest rank in the Buddhist hierarchy, immediately below a Buddha. This bearded saint that we see here is in a yogic posture, and he holds an open-handed scroll as if preaching. And this is, for being a divine being, there's a startling naturalism to it, really, that I believe, and it suggests actually a portrait from life, which is not typical of Tibetan and Buddhist art generally. Arhats, especially when shown in painting, follow Chinese styles of portrayals and landscape, although this this statue is more Tibetan in form. Next, we have the Mahasiddha. This is largely peculiar to Tibet. These images of Mahasiddha, although they are mentioned in texts elsewhere, it's a Sanskrit word for a great being who has attained his goal. While the Arhat is portrayed as a monk, these yogis or great mystics are shown as forest-dwelling eccentrics. There is a view that the popularity of these particular figures relates to the importance of authority and guruship in Tibet specifically. Let's see. So next, I'm going to move on to different forms of art. There are so many different areas of influence that Tibetan artists drew from, including northeastern India, Nepal, Kashmir, Central Asia, and China, as well as their indigenous traditions, that it's really futile to try to concisely chart the style of Tibetan art. It's very convoluted and very hard to describe. So I'll instead just focus on types of images going forward. And these are all from the 11th through the 19th centuries. What do I have? Oh, hold on. I forgot to put it in mandala. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about mandala. Here, I'm gonna zoom out of this and go to, here we go. Here we go. I don't know why I forgot to put the mandala in. So I'm just going to show you it here on the website. So mandalas are representations of Buddhist cosmology, showing at the center Mount Meru, the sacred five-peak mountain and home of the gods. The center is surrounded by 7 oceans and 7 concentric mountain rings. And this is all very stylized within the mandala. And beyond the mountain ranges is the great ocean containing 4 island continents corresponding to the central, corresponding to the cardinal points, and the southernmost island is the home of humanity. The human body itself is also considered a mandala and thus a microcosm of the universe. Its central axis representing Mount Meru, the holy mountain home of the gods. Symmetry is very central to the idea of the mandala, as it gives a sense of order and permanence. Ultimately, whether they're two-dimensional paintings, temporary pieces of created of poured colored sand, or three-dimensional sculptures or works of architecture, mandalas are essentially symbolic of the archetypal patterns which form the whole of life. And let's see if I can get into, oh, okay, let's go back. Okay, so next we're gonna go on to ritual objects. As with paintings, ritual objects are used by practitioners as aids in a difficult and lengthy program of mental generation and progression that is needed to create and utilize detailed visualizations of a specific deity. And this is what's, ritual objects are really central to Vajrayana and Tibetan Buddhism specifically. And it descends in part from the traditional Tibetan shamanism, which was syncretized with Buddhism. On the right, we can see a ritual flaying knife. The handle is in the form of a vajra, again, like I said, a thunderbolt. While most of the symbols in Tibet derive from Indian practice too, the thunderbolt, the vajra, and the bell or ganta are especially important, often combined to symbolize paired opposites such as male and female aspects. The vajra is particularly important, held to be central to Tibetan religion. It is often combined with other objects such as daggers, as we see here. And the dagger as a ritual object is peculiar to Tibet. Next, we see a skull cup or skull cap drum. As you can, if you look on the detail on this, this was an actual drum made of two human skull caps. The importance of the skull cap is a little bit harder to understand. Often it's filled with blood or brain matter. The use of skulls, as well as other types of implements made of human bone, is found throughout Asia. And its purpose is often to frighten away evil spirits. So again, like the wrathful deity, it's seen in a very positive light. Some of you might be familiar with the Tibetan practice of sky burial, which is feeding dead bodies to vultures. This is connected to the belief in the transient nature of human life. And in some cases, when an object is made of bone or even ash, the purpose is to bring the worshiper as close as possible to a venerated personage from whom the material was recovered. So very similar in a way to relics that we see in the Western tradition. Moving on to images. In Tibet, paintings and sculptures are considered offerings, prayers for the well-being of all. The physical object is a prayer itself for the well-being of all living things. And both the commissioning and creation of images are considered meritorious in terms of karma, although the artists themselves did not affix their names to specific works, in keeping with the emphasis on the lack of a self. Interestingly enough, donors, however, were often named and honored. So we can see some, again, hierarchy going on. In this portrait painting, we see a specific person um, portrayed. I believe he's a, I want to say, um, actually, I can't remember who this person is. But either way, in portraits of people, social and historical stature, respect, age, and religious sanctity were the qualities most valued rather than personality and physical likeness. And so this is why, if you look from portrait to portrait, it often seems like they're the same person. The idea of making them in a humanistic way, in a humanistic likeness, is not as highly valued. And again, if we go back to the statue of the Arhat earlier, that was a bit unusual in how individualistic it looked. Aiming to record the inner qualities and the transcendent nature of an individual rather than their earthly being. Tibetan painting was unique amongst Buddhist cultures in combining the mortal and the divine, commenting often on the spiritual lineages that define the various sectarian orders. Again, like I said, the monastic orders were very much in competition with each other over history, and identifying particular personages as part of the lineage of an order was very important. However, there is a degree of realism that we see in Tibetan painting that's different from classical Indian and Chinese formulae. Because the individual philosopher teacher was more important in Tibet, the portrait is more important, again, to the religion than in India or China. Their importance was such, in fact, that they are sometimes as portrayed as being deified, posed in a manner of a Buddha. So even though these weren't necessarily divine figures, sometimes they were apotheosized or deified, but even if they weren't, they were still portrayed as such within the portrait. And in line with the pre-Buddhist ancestor worship of Tibet, the images of founders and masters of the orders within the religion were sanctified and believed to hold the spirit of the deceased. Tankas, I mentioned this earlier. Many of the paintings that we've seen so far are tankas. They're usually cotton banners, and they're portable. They can be rolled up. They're usually painted with either gouache or distemper. These are two kinds of paint using glue. Animal glue is the binder. Again, they're consecrated, and they're believed to be inhabited by the deity, as I mentioned earlier. They repeat a regular visual formula for the purpose is to convey the spiritual essence and the timeless presence of the deity which inhabits the painting. Like I said, they're portable. They can be rolled up easily and transported. And this helped in the diffusion of ideas and concepts. So that there's a lot that I have not shown you, in part because it's been hard to find images, suitable images of things. Again, much of, like, as I mentioned in the beginning, much of what existed prior to the 1950s was destroyed. And it's also a bit hard to search for some of these concepts and images on the internet. But I felt like I gave you a fairly good overview of things. As we can see in the artwork I've shown you so far, Tibetan Buddhism is characterized by a yearning for a deep spiritual connection with the divine in the hope of being released from the suffering of this world, as is common in other forms of Mahayana Buddhism. Artwork itself is seen as a means of making that connection on a personal level. While many of the basic tenets of the religions are different, I hope you can see the similarities between this approach to artwork and that of the Byzantine Orthodoxy that we looked at last week. If anybody has any questions, they can unmute and speak up, or you can write something in the chat. So anybody have any questions or comments?
Do you recommend any particular source for learning more about Tibetan art and theology?
I have a book which will be, it's called The Art of Tibet by Robert E. Fisher. That was where I got a lot of my source material from. There's also The Art of Buddhism, I think also by him, both in the World of Art series. Like I said, again, I would go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art website and search for Buddhism. And that'll give you not only works of art, but also
Commentary?
essays on Buddhism that you can read that are very approachable and again, focus more on the art than anything else.
Were images venerated as they in Buddhism as they are sometimes venerated in Western Christianity?
Yes, so it's a little bit different. Although I'll probably say that to anything when trying to compare the two. It's the deity actually inhabits the work of art. So you could say that, I don't want to say it's idolatrous, but in a way it kind of is. But it's not, it's hard to say that they're worshiping the image itself because it's embodied by the deity. So yeah. Like I said, it's beyond me to explain whether they're worshiping the image in the way that we think of it as idolatry, nor is it the same as we think of venerated images in the West.
So it's sort of an homage to various teachers and
in some cases, yes. If it's a portrait of a leader, of an historical leader, yeah, it's kind of an homage. But there's also divine aspects to the image as well, as far as I understand.
it's interesting that you said that animal glue was a binder because it involves the death of an animal. And my understanding of Buddhism is that that's not something you do.
Well, that I think you're thinking more of Jainism.
Yes.
Jainism is particularly
Right.
focused on the sanctity of all living things.
And which is more of an
Indian
Indian religion.
Right, it's another Indian religion. It's very much related to Buddhism. I don't know if they venerate the Buddha at all. But let's see.
They were contemporaries.
Right, they were contemporaries. And so they have, and like Hinduism also has there's some interesting concepts going on with the sanctity of life. But there's also an emphasis, especially in Buddhism, on the transience of life, and not holding on to any particular living being. Who is it? You had a question? Yes.
Yes. Could you comment on the bright colors?
Oh, the brightness of the colors?
Yeah.
What to say about that? I think in part, a lot of it has to do with the fact that they survived. Has a lot to do with the fact that they were placed in monasteries. As to why the colors were so bright, they're not always. But I think, to the best put it, it's not realistic in the way that we think of it in West. Images are not seen as supposed to be realistic in the same way that we do in the West. And so the idea of gradation and muted colors, again, this is supposed to be an emanation of the divine. It's not supposed to be a representation of a particular person, or if it is, they themselves are sort of deified in a way. Right. That's my best explanation for the reason why the colors are so vibrant.
So the divine doesn't do pastels.
There are plenty of pastels also.
Yes.
Are
I mean, there is a wide range. I think I showed you
Huge.
some of the more vibrant pictures. But as we can see, like in this one here, the colors aren't quite as vibrant. This one again, there's some more muted colors. Now I don't know exactly how much that was affected by time.
So
But
pigments are derived from natural sources, plants.
I expect, like in the West, they're mostly mineral and vegetable pigments. That they sourced from all over the world. I mean, remember, Tibet is at the center of the Silk Road in a way, or at least one of the branches. And so they were definitely, although they were cut off in some ways, they also had access to a lot of materials. So,
Ross, I have a brief question. Do you
Yeah.
have a sense for the general ways in which Tibetan Buddhist art differs from the Mahayana Buddhist art?
Well, again, the
Mahayana
Vajrayana
is
is
Buddhist.
considered a kind of form of Mahayana, to be specific about it. And Vajrayana is not absolutely unique to Tibet. Like I said, there are Vajrayana texts from India. The way that it's different, the way the art is different, I think I mentioned it a few times. Especially the veneration of particular historical figures is very important. That's not quite seen so much in other Asian cultures. So that's the main thing I can think of. In terms of the style, like I said, after I think it was the 14th or 15th centuries or so, it can be more accurately described as Sino-Tibetan in style.
Right.
There was a large influx of influence from the East and China. And I can't remember, I guess that would be with the Ming, that'd be the Ming dynasty. And I can't remember what the geography of the Ming was in terms of how much they interfered in Tibet in the middle of the the second millennium.
It was fairly expansive.
Yeah, that's what I remember.
From a territorial point of view, how their actual control, I don't know if that extended all the way, but
Yeah.
this is really helpful. Thank you. This makes me want to spend all day on the Met's website looking at
Okay, good.
All right, thank you.
Yep. Anybody else?
Thank you.
Of course. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and stop it. Again, if you want to, this will be, you can always email me. It's rherman@me.com if you have any questions that you want to follow up with. And you can always view this again when they put the video up later in the week. So everybody have a good Sunday,
Thank you.
and
Thank
hopefully
you.
I'll be able to do this
Thank
again
you.
sometime later.